If you've ever been to a mill or around someone who cuts slabs from his own logs, you've likely seen a big, beautiful, wide board and thought about all the great things you can make from it. A headboard, a door, a big tabletop like you've seen in old antique furniture from the days when extra wide boards were common. Maybe you plan to make a countertop or one of those slab tables or benches that are so popular these days. So you took the slab home, you stood it in your shop, and a week later it was cupped like a crescent moon and you wondered how it could go so wrong so fast. The problem is today's trees aren't 500-year-old growth timber with trunks 6 feet in diameter. If you find a 2-foot wide board, it was likely sawn from the widest part of the tree right down the center. This is a blessing and a curse. The blessing is all those growth rings that run perpendicular to the board's faces. That's called quarter sawn grain and it's prized for stability. Those parts of the board will stay relatively flat. The curse is the few small inner rings in the center of the board and the dark pith that runs down the middle. That is the worst part of the tree and it can ruin your plans for a nice flat tabletop. As we've explained in previous videos, logs do not shrink evenly to miniature versions of themselves. The fibers shrink tangentially or parallel to the rings at twice the rate as they do radially across the rings. Put simply, those circular tree rings will try to flatten out. The tighter the curve, the more that wood is going to cup as those rings try to flatten. And nowhere do the rings curve tighter than in the center of the tree. So while the outer portions of the slab may stay nice and flat, it's going to fold right down the pith. And that's not the only problem you're likely to have. The pith and those inner rings are the adolescent part of the tree. That's when it was young and going through its awkward stage. The fibers are all soft and squishy. It stood kind of crooked. It had little twigs sticking out everywhere that later became little knots. It's unstable wood and it's going to split and crack and move and warp. As long as your board contains the pith or those small inner rings, you're going to have problems. There's only one thing to do. You have to cut your beautiful wide slab and take that center section out. Now this can be hard to do. Take this countertop for example. You can tell one of these two boards was from the center of the tree because you can see the pith near the surface. The other one was from right next to it, and even though it doesn't have the pith, you can see some of those little inner rings on the end grain, and you can see a row of little knots from those early twigs right down the center of the board. We really wanted to edge glue these two boards together for a countertop. The book matched grain made it look almost like it was a single slab, but we also knew these inner rings would cause problems down the road. The counter was likely to cup or develop cracks and checks down the middle. There's only one thing to do. Rip the two boards into 4, removing about an inch wide strip from the center of each one. We didn't get all the knots, but we did eliminate the smallest, tightly curved rings from down the center of each board. Now when they're glued back together, the slab will be much more likely to remain nice and flat. The end result isn't as impressive as a single wide slab would have been, but stability is more important than beauty. Nobody wants a countertop shaped like a trough. So the next time you want to use a wide board cut from the center of a tree, remember, it's better to take the pith off than to be pithed on. If you've never heard of a master gauge, I'm not surprised. Paul Riley and his family don't use a lot of flashy marketing gimmicks. They just let their tools speak for themselves. You'd expect that from a guy who spent nearly half a century developing precision tools to set up and fine-tune machinery of all types. Now he shares his most clever ideas with his fellow woodworkers. Check them out at mastergauge.com. Wait, don't go yet. If you're new here, please subscribe and remember to ring the bell. I would really appreciate that. Give us a thumbs up, or better yet, leave us a comment. I always read them. And be sure to check out the latest issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal. It's always packed with tips, tricks, and tutorials designed to make you a better woodworker.